Good evening. Uh, Good evening, gentlemen. Just a quick thumbs up if you guys can all hear me okay. It's wonderful to be with you this evening, even virtually. And I wish I was there in person. Of course, the opportunity to come and hang around with a bunch of rubbishes that matriculated a while ago is something that is hard to pass up. Nick, myself, and Ross, we were desperate to come, but of course, with all things COVID, considered that it was probably prudent that we stay behind. But of course, Boys Eye is full of groundbreakers. There's been many, and so tonight I feel part of a very special breaking club in that I think I'm probably the first and hopefully the last guy to address the old boys over a screen. It's an incredibly stupid thing to groundbreak, but I'm happy that it has to be me. It's lovely to be with all of you. In preparation for tonight, I was thinking around the fact that I matriculated in 1996, and I was wondering that if I had the opportunity to go back in time and talk to the 18-year-old Nick Dreyer and tell him a little bit about what the future looked like, what parts he may or may not believe. So if I managed to get back in time and sat down with an 18-year-old Nick Dreyer and told him that a Boys Eye boy would end up being the richest guy on earth and redefine space and also make electric cars accessible to the world, I think at a stretch I could probably believe it. Now, if you told me in 1996 that sometime in the future you'd be able to take a telephone which is made of glass and swipe left and right and somehow magically meet a girl, I think it may not have been the easiest thing to do, but I probably would have believed it. The last thing, of course, if you went back to 1996 and told me that sometime in the future, I'd be on a digital virtual call on something called the internet, which in 96 didn't exist. And I'd be on that call over a screen talking to Pretoria Boys High, and that this communication medium would be called Zoom. I think I probably could have believed it, but if you told me that that meeting would have been with John Ilsley, then I simply don't think I would have believed it at all. And that, of course, is exactly what happened to me a few months ago with myself, Ross, and Nick having the great pleasure of talking to Greg Hassenkamp and Mr. Ilsley about designing a bespoke shoe for Pretoria Boys High. What an incredible pleasure it has been. And I'd like to extend my thanks to the school and to the Old Boys Association for the time taken to help us with that project. Now, most of you will know, some of you will know by the introduction by now, that I'm the CEO of a company called Feldskin Shoes. And if you've been either listening to our podcast or if you've been on any one of our meetings, you'll know that there's two Nicks and a Ross. Now, just to make sure that everybody knows, without a beat, no matter what meeting you go in, no matter what podcast you're on, Ross Zornak will always introduce me as Fat Nick, in reference to the fact that I've put on weight since school. Nick Latouf is the one that is referred to by Ross as a good-looking Nick. You can make up your own minds at some other point. And then if you want to know who Ross is, of course, he's the one that sounds like an hysterical 60-year-old lady. So that's who the three of us are. Now, 20 years has passed since we were in matric and started Feldskin, and of course, it's been incredible, and we've had wonderful experiences, all three of us. Varied occupations, doing many, many things, but one of the things, and it was alluded to in my introduction, is that not one of us ever learned how to do anything in fashion, retail, online, or even shoes. A little bit more on that later. Now, just by way of my quick bio, as mentioned, after school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I decided to take a year off. Now, in my year, I'd never heard the term take a gap year. In fact, I think if you said that you were taking a gap year, one of your mates would probably call you a tool. It's probably the same, other schools refer to it as that. But anyway, I went into the hotel industry and I joined a wonderful hotel called Element House after a quick stint in London. And Element House was, of course, owned by Paul Harris, who's one of the founders of First Rand, who ended up becoming a very important mentor to me. He pushed me into many different industries, as mentioned, the wonderful gallery Everard Reed, and then into tourism and conservation, Great Plains Conservation. So I worked for Paul for 13 very happy but intense years, and managed to get some pretty good experience, which I'm very grateful for. Then in 2013, my father passed away, which of course is a time for reflection. My father, incidentally, was a Pretoria Boys High boy and matriculated in 1972. Now, at this time, I decided to go and have a go on my own. So I was 37 years old and I decided to join the entrepreneurial world. And I'm actually very grateful for the introduction, because it makes my business endeavors sound quite successful. It's actually quite the contrary, and I'd love to share that with you now. My first business, if it was Oriti, which is a specialized art advisory business that sold advisory services to high net worth individuals. The one tremendous issue with that was that nobody was willing to pay me for the services that I was trying to sell. So Oriti failed almost immediately. And it taught me one of the great business lessons of my life, which is in any business, you're going to need revenue. So lesson number one, tick. I then started an exhibitions business, which then imported and hosted world-class exhibitions in South Africa. That also struggled, even though we sold a hell of a lot of tickets and we were successful in bringing these exhibitions to South Africa. But the trouble was, of course, that we had to pay for these exhibitions in US dollars, and we were selling the tickets in good old South African rand. So lesson number two in business was, you're going to need revenue, but you've got to make sure that your costs do not exceed your revenue. So simple business lesson number two was learned. So then I find myself in 2016 unemployed, struck out twice in business, and with a baby on the way. And it is in this state of mind that between Ross and myself and Nicola Tuff, Veldschoen was born. Now, Veldschoen Shoes is this business that was well said in my introduction, which has gone so quickly in terms of its growth. The big highlights, of course, are the fact that in 2016 we started. In 2017 we attracted the investment of a listed company called Long for Life. We then grew into the UK. We garnered some interesting investment, which I'll tell you about, in the USA, which managed to get us on the front pages of all the major South African news outlets, including the front page of the Business Day, which we're very proud of. We then became the first non-owned Woolworths brand to be in their apparel section or their clothing section. And then we ended up becoming the shoe of choice for a number of high-profile individuals, one of them being Harry. I critically do not give him his Royal Highness treatment, seeing that he's chosen to not have it anymore. So it's Harry, of course, Ashton Kutcher, and then just recently, Matthew McConaughey was making his announcement to potentially run for governor of Texas wearing our shoes. He was wearing a pair of J-Bay shoes, which I think says he may lean Democrat, but we'll wait and see how that goes. And then one of the biggest achievements has happened just recently. Veldschoen has become a sponsor of the South African Olympic team, and if all things work out, our team members, our champions of South Africa, will be walking out in the stadium at the opening ceremony, and they'll be wearing Veldschoen shoes, which I think is a remarkable achievement for a company that's only been around for 4 years, and in fact was born out of the fact that the athletes didn't really look that great. So that is Veldschoen, and it's done unbelievably well. We're incredibly blessed, and it's been a remarkable journey. But the story of Veldschoen is intrinsically linked to the three founders. Of course, we have a big team, and there's been tremendous value added, but the three founders, Ross Sondag, Nicola Tuff, and myself, are three very, very different individuals. And in fact, if you really dig deep into it, we've only pretty much got one thing in common, and that is the fact that we went to the same school. There's a wonderful saying that goes that partnerships only work in odd numbers, and that 3 is too many. So it's pretty interesting to try and figure out why the three of us do work out so well together. We actually sat down about 2 years ago to try and figure it out, and we landed on the fact that it was our school experience that had laid the foundation for our business culture and our culture in our management team. When we sat down, we discovered some interesting stuff. Firstly, we discovered that we were all three came from families that at some point had struggled financially. Now, that while we were at school, we may have all shared the same worries, but then we were never judged because of it. And the reason we were never judged is because simply nobody cared about that sort of thing. At Boys High, privilege meant and still means nothing. Ability in sports, culture, and learning is celebrated equally. And importantly, you can count on your mates to be there for you when it actually matters. And the one thing I found amazing about school was that we always came together if we noticed or saw that somebody was being mistreated. Now, at school, we learned that there's an underlying and it's almost an unshakable respect for each other that allows us the freedom to disagree vehemently, and we do. We can debate robustly, but always with a certain kindness that allows the loser not to feel belittled, but rather worthied as an opponent. And I think that is a tremendous quality that the school gives us. Now, this culture naturally emanates from the three of us because we know no different, and it has permeated into our business. And we now enjoy in Veldskin a culture of collaboration, competitiveness, and kindness because of it. So who are these three guys? The first one is Nick Latouf. Now, I'm glad that Nick has managed to jump onto the call, so he's with us this evening. Everything that I'll say about these guys, I'll say to their faces. In fact, it normally gets a little bit worse to their faces. So but let me tell you a little bit more about them. So Nick Latouf, he's the creative engine at Veldskin Shoes. He joined Ross and me a few months after we started, and he was actually the first person not to laugh at the idea. I mean, two English guys coming to their mates saying, listen, we're going to start a Veldskin company. Is pretty laughable at the best of times, and our wives and all our mates pretty much laughed at us when we began. But Nick did it. Nick actually saw that there was potential, not just in the shoe, but also in the opportunity to change the way South Africa thought about this product. Now at school, Nick, I could only describe as probably the original hipster. Now the term hipster in 1996 didn't exist, but Nick showed all the signs even then. So he's obviously very creative. He's counterculture. Importantly, he had the makings of a magnificent beard. He also used to bunk on the koppie a lot, and he listened to bands like the Violent Femmes and Nirvana. Box hipster. So he does, however, have this creativity, but it does present its challenges. And I want to tell you a good example of this. In 2018, for about 4 months, Nick, myself, and Ross were working on this incredible deal to try and get an investment in the US with a company called Fun Brands. Now, Fun Brands is owned by the Watts family, the movie star Ashton Kutcher, and the billionaire Mark Cuban. I always find it difficult to tell the story because saying that a guy like Ashton Kutcher would invest in Veldskin Shoes is a little bit like saying Jennifer Aniston is investing in a Boerewors company. But needless to say, it was a pretty big deal. Now, they'd set a deadline in place because they've got some pretty severe lawyers, and we had our lawyers with our listed company. And they'd set a deadline for the end of March, as I remember. And we had about a week window to close. Now, we put off our bookings of our flights because we wanted to get to a specific level of certainty before we commit to sending Ross and myself to Los Angeles to go and close. Late morning on the Friday, we heard that the window had opened for us to go. And so Ross and I sped to the airport and left Nick in charge to make sure that while we were in transit, nobody cocked it up. Nick then stayed behind, and myself and Ross jumped on a plane from Cape Town to Joburg, from Joburg to Dubai, from Dubai to Milan, from Milan to New York, from New York to Los Angeles. And we arrived there on the Monday morning. We got into a hire car and drove straight to the lawyer's office. And we walked straight into an office that I can only describe to those of you that were around at the time, looked exactly like LA Law. And they gave us a delicious cup of coffee, sat us down and said, sorry, boys, the deal is off. While we were in transit, our lawyers and their lawyers had disagreed on a couple of points, and it was finished. Of course, Ross and I spent a week negotiating hard, and it was a traumatic time, but we managed to get through it. And the good news is that, of course, we managed to secure this investment, and Veldskin went on to be known as this global brand. The question was, of course, what was Nick doing that we kept? And true to form, he may not have had a copy, but I think the only argument can be made that Nick was probably bunking. I believe that every single business needs a creator, someone whose mind wanders into the future and dreams of what a business or what a brand could be. And in this guy, we are so blessed at Veldskin to have Nick Latouf. He's the custodian of our brand, and he's shepherding it now while it grows and graduates from South Africa and into the rest of the world. We deeply, deeply appreciate his time and energy that he spends on the business. Right, the next one, my mate Ross Zonda. So we met at school actually on the first day of Form 1. We became friends, and we have stayed friends to this day. We didn't become business partners until Veldskin, although we did have lots of conversations about it. And the business was actually born out of a conversation with both myself and Ross on the phone. I was driving from Plet, and Ross was driving around Cape Town trying his best to be a builder, which at the time, like at best, probably a below average builder. But Ross was driving around, spent a lot of time in his car. And in that conversation, a lot happened. As the story goes that we actually, in that conversation, ended up settling on Veldskin and trademarking it. But in that moment, Ross said something profoundly intelligent and simplistically beautiful. He used these words. He said, "Why don't we just call it Veldskin?" Now, I refer to this as like a moment of brazen naivety. And it was this statement that would actually put us onto the path of simplistic success, because we didn't have to explain to anybody what Veldskin was. It literally said it in the name. And this is what makes Ross so successful, is that he can get down to the most simple truths of something, and he can articulate that in a way that makes it accessible to everybody. So Ross was the ultimate boy's eye boy. And you're gonna find this humorous, and I find it humorous and slightly annoying. But when we're on a Zoom call with Boys High, and Greg and Hasselkamp and Mr. Ilsley turn their video on, Ross immediately stands up and says, "Hello, sir, how are you doing?" Which I'm not sure if that is the etiquette on digital meetings, but he nevertheless does that. And to this day, sorry. And yeah, it can get a little bit annoying. But now, what Ross does very well is that he influences people in a positive way. And he actually ended up becoming getting a leadership position at the school as a prefect. He never excelled, but the one thing he did was he touched people's psyche in a positive way, and his passion and his energy always rubbed off on people quite effortlessly. And it's an intangible asset to be able to do that. And Ross is an intangible guy. But I genuinely believe that every single business needs a really strong heart. And in Ross Zonda, Veldskin Shoes certainly has a very big one. Then there's me. So I'm another type of boy's eye boy. I was relatively reserved. I had varied friends groups. I had varied interests. I played a little music. I played a little sport, but I wasn't great at any of them. I was pretty much middle of the road academically. The only subject that I enjoyed was history. And thank you to Mr. Ilsley. I had a diverse set of interests, and I ended up in business. But now, of course, my title is the CEO of this company, Veldskin Shoes. But it's an interesting title because myself and Nick and Ross genuinely believe that we're not in a position of leadership in this business, but more so that we're the custodians of something that is quite special. There's very few opportunities like Veldskin that come along in a career. And what we realized is the concept of Veldskin had been around for so many years in South Africa, and we managed to make it look different and shine a light on it and put some positivity into South Africa. And that was actually an important job, but it was rather the job of a custodian than it was of a leader. And to this day, we genuinely believe that we've got a very precious gift and that we have to look after it, not just for ourselves, but mostly to push forward and to make sure that it grows to the potential that it can be. So here are the three most unlikely footwear brand founders. Only one thing in common: a school on a hill in Pretoria. Now, the last thing I need to do is to tell a room full of old boys how amazing Pretoria Boys Eye is. But I would like to offer a tiny bit of advice to the boys that are currently at this school. It really doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter how you fit in. It doesn't matter what you think you may be one day. Pretoria Boys High, in its own very special, unique way, will prepare you for the road ahead, whether you recognize that at school or not. It'll teach you respect, it'll teach you competitiveness, resilience, and kindness, which I guarantee you will serve boys well, not just in their families, but in their careers. The other thing I'd like to say, and it's relevant to you guys as well as to the guys at school. No, there's very few places in the world where an opportunity like Veldsken presents itself like South Africa. We've obviously got our issues. I mean, at any moment, the lights could go off with load shedding. So just I apologize if it happens. But at any moment, it could happen. We've got corruption, we've got a whole bunch of stuff. But I tell you, the opportunity in this country is palpable. And there's very few places in the world where a business like Veldsken could have happened. We are long on South Africa because we believe in South Africa. We believe in our manufacturing. We believe in our management. We've got incredibly talented people, and we know that in our hearts, South Africans want to do well for each other. There's no doubt that we can exceed globally. And I think we all have aspirations and we all have our worries, and those are completely relevant and normal. But take a minute to think about what we can achieve in South Africa, and take a minute to think about how we talk about South Africa and try and change that confidence factor that will get us to the next level. I want to thank you guys so much for the opportunity and the invitation to come and speak to you tonight, but I actually have a job to do. My job tonight is to raise a toast to Pretoria Boys High. I can tell you, it's probably something I would never have dreamt of when I was at school, but it gives me immense pride and it gives me immense satisfaction to invite all of you, please, to stand up, grab a glass, and say a cheers to Pretoria Boys High, to the school. Gentlemen, I'm going to sign off. Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm going to sign off on behalf of myself and Ross and Nick and the entire team, our families. Tonight, we wish we could have been with you, but we're there with you in spirit. We wish you Godspeed and we wish you good health. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Have great fun reminiscing tonight, and I look forward to seeing all of you very, very soon. Good night. Thank you.